the bitter winter of 1873. Whispers drifted through the German immigrant community of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Whispers about a pale, quiet 11-year-old girl named Emma Richter. She could, without hesitation, tell you the day of the week for any date in human history, word for word, recall entire conversations after hearing them only once, and count the exact number of steps between any two buildings in her neighborhood, what modern science might label as an extraordinary neurological gift was, in 1873, seen as either a divine blessing or something far more sinister. But when Emma began using her uncanny abilities to uncover buried secrets, foresee fatal accidents, and describe intimate details of crimes no living soul should have known, fascination turned into fear. By spring's thaw, 3 men would be dead, a family would vanish into the night, and Emma herself would disappear without a trace, leaving behind only a worn leather journal filled with cryptic numbers no one dared to decode. Before we continue the unsettling tale of Emma Richter, the shadows her extraordinary mind cast over Milwaukee's German quarter, make sure you subscribe and turn on the notification bell. We bring you haunting historical mysteries every week. Tell us in the comments what state or city you're listening from, because these stories happened in places just like yours, closer to home than you might believe. What the residents of Brewery Town didn't yet know was that Emma's gift would unravel a web of deceit, betrayal, and murder that had been carefully hidden for nearly a decade, and that her cold, mathematical precision would become their worst nightmare. Milwaukee's German Quarter in 1873 was alive with the clink of brewery bottles, the scent of fresh bread from stone ovens, and the mingling of German and English voices in the crisp Wisconsin air. Nearly 8,000 German immigrants had built their own miniature Bavaria on the shores of Lake Michigan, complete with beer gardens, traditional bakeries, and the comforting rhythms of old-world life transplanted onto American soil. Men worked the great breweries, Slit's Best, and dozens of smaller houses, while their wives tended gardens, growing the same vegetables their families had cultivated for generations in the Rhineland. Among them were Heinrich and Greta Richter, who had arrived from Bavaria in 1861 with dreams of prosperity and their newborn daughter, Emma. Heinrich found steady work as a brewmaster at the Kellner Brewery, while Greta took in laundry and mending by candlelight long after Emma had been tucked into bed in their modest home on Galena Street. By every measure, the Richters were an ordinary family except for their child. Emma was born 3 weeks premature during the Atlantic crossing, so small the ship's doctor doubted she'd survive. Yet survive she did, remaining slight and pale, her enormous gray eyes taking in the world with unsettling intensity. As a toddler, she rarely cried, preferring to sit quietly, watching and listening as the adult world unfolded around her. By age 4, her parents noticed something strange. She could recite conversations from days earlier, perfectly mimicking voices and accents. She counted everything, the stitches in her mother's embroidery, the steps from their door to the bakery, the exact seconds between the brewery whistles that marked each workday. When Heinrich taught her basic arithmetic, she absorbed it with alarming speed, solving problems in her head before he could write them down. The community regarded her talents with equal parts pride and unease. Mrs. Brennan, an old woman whose grandmother had lived through the witch trials, would cross herself whenever Emma's calculating gaze met hers. But Father Koller, the stout Bavarian priest, insisted Emma's gifts were heaven-sent, a sign of divine wisdom in the new world. Then came the brutal winter of 1872. The cold was so severe that Lake Michigan froze solid for the first time in a generation. Men huddled by coal stoves, their breath clouding in the air indoors, while women struggled to keep families warm and fed. It was during these months of isolation that Emma's observations took a darker turn. From her seat by the kitchen window, she began studying her neighbors the way she studied, numbers, tracking patterns in their movements and routines. Mr. Kruger always took the same route to the brewery 247 steps up on Wednesdays, when it was 284. Mrs. Fisher hung her laundry in a precise sequence, but altered it completely if her husband worked late. Harmless enough until Emma began stating her conclusions aloud in ways that chilled the adults who heard them. The turning point came on a gray February morning in 1873. Emma was quietly eating breakfast while her mother packed her father's lunch when she suddenly said, "Mr. Dietrich will not come home from the brewery today. He will die at exactly 14 minutes past 2. Greta nearly dropped the lunch tin. "Emma, my God, what a thing to say. Why would you think that?" Emma's eyes never wavered. "He has been drinking from the small brown bottle for 17 days. Yesterday, he drank 3 times more than usual. His steps were uneven 251 instead of 244. When patterns change by more than 10%, something significant happens within 72 hours. Mr. Dietrich's pattern changed by 12. The calculation is simple." Henrik froze at the door, his coat half-buttoned. Yes, Dietrich was a drinker, but no worse than most men in the quarter. The thought of Emma tracking his every move and predicting his death with such cold certainty, the room felt even colder. "You must not speak of death, Emma," Henrik said firmly. She simply nodded and went back to her breakfast. At exactly 14 minutes past 2, Jan Dietrich collapsed in the brewery's malt room. The cause, heart failure from chronic alcohol poisoning. Workers later admitted he'd been drinking more, heavily, acting strange, and visibly anxious. But what they remembered most was the timing. Emma Richter's grim prophecy had been precise to the minute. Word spread like smoke from a chimney fire. Some dismissed it as coincidence. Others remembered the pale girl with the unblinking eyes, and began to wonder what else she had seen from her quiet place at the kitchen window. The Richter family soon became the subject of whispers and sidelong glances. At church, in the market, on the narrow streets, people's eyes lingered just a moment too long. Even Father Caller, who had once praised Emma's gifts as a blessing from God, now seemed less sure. After Sunday Mass, Henrik approached the priest for guidance. The warmth in Caller's face had been replaced by concern. "Henrik, my friend," he said, his Bavarian accent heavy with unease. "Perhaps it would be best if young Emma spent less time watching the neighbors, and more time with her prayers. The Lord gives us gifts, yes, but sometimes the devil twists even the most innocent abilities toward darker ends." The words unsettled Henrik. He was a man of work and reason, not superstition. Yet, he could not ignore the precision of Emma's prediction about Dietrich's death. That evening, he sat his daughter down. "Emma, tell me the truth. How did you know?" Her enormous gray eyes met his, steady and unreadable. "I watch, I count, I remember." Mr. Dietrich's behavior changed in predictable ways. When alcohol intake rises by 37% over 17 days, while food consumption drops by 20%, cardiac stress is inevitable. I calculated the most probable time of failure based on his age, weight, and symptoms. The words froze the blood in Henrik's veins. His 11-year-old spoke not like a child, but like a physician or something more unsettling. "But how did you know about his eating and drinking?" "I observe everything, Papa, every person, every day, every pattern," she replied. Then, after a pause, "Would you like to hear the other calculations I've made?" Henrik shook his head quickly. He did not want to know, but as he tucked her into bed that night, he could not shake the feeling that they were on the brink of something much darker than a child's harmless curiosity. Outside, February snow blanketed the German quarter, muffling every sound. Inside, Emma lay in her narrow bed, her mind sorting through the day's data, processing numbers, weighing probabilities, and arriving at conclusions no child should want to reach. In the weeks following Dietrich's death, the air in Milwaukee's German quarter grew tense. Emma kept her daily post by the kitchen window, her gaze cool and mechanical as it followed the movements of neighbors. Her parents now watched her with the same unease the neighbors felt. The brewing community was close-knit men, bound by their work, women by their shared hardships, children by the cramped streets between red brick buildings. But Emma had never blended in. While other children played, she sat apart, counting, calculating, and watching with an intensity that unnerved even those who loved her. Greta began to notice the change in her daughter's reports. They were no longer just observations, they were revelations. One morning, Emma mentioned that Mrs. Weber had been meeting brewery owner, Mr. Kellner, behind the brewery for 6 consecutive Tuesdays. Another time, she calmly noted that the Schneider family had been burying something wrapped in cloth in their garden every Sunday after church. When Greta demanded to know how she could possibly know such things, Emma's answer was chillingly simple. People think they are being secret, but they follow patterns, just like numbers. Mrs. Weber tells her husband she's visiting her sister, but her steps 127 to Kellner's house are far fewer than the 349 to her sister's. The Schneiders bury objects exactly 73 centimeters apart in a grid. They believe no one sees. But I am always watching. That night, Henrik told Greta, "This cannot continue. She is becoming unnatural. Children should not see such things, much less speak of them this way." Greta's voice trembled. "I'm frightened, Henrik. Not of Emma, but of what people will think." Already, Mrs. Brennan crossed the street to avoid me, and Father Collar. He hasn't visited since Dietrich's death. Their fears proved justified 3 days later. Emma was helping prepare dinner, when she suddenly stopped peeling potatoes, her eyes locked in that cold, calculating way. "Mrs. Weber will be discovered tomorrow at 11 in the morning. Her husband will find her with Mr. Kellner in the brewery office. There will be violence." Greta's knife clattered to the table. "Emma, you mustn't say such things. Mrs. Weber has been arriving 7 minutes earlier each week for 6 weeks. Mr. Kellner has been staying 33 minutes later each day. Tomorrow, Mr. Weber will return 47 minutes early because his horse is developing lameness in her left front leg. I've observed her gait deteriorating for 11 days. These 3 variables converge. Discovery is inevitable." "And how do you know about the horse?" Henrik demanded from the doorway. "I count her steps when she passes. On March 1st, she favored her right legs 53% of the time. Today, 68. Tomorrow, it will slow the route enough to bring him home early." The next day played out exactly as Emma had said. Wilhelm Weber found his wife with Kellner. The fight left Kellner bloodied and broken, and Anna Weber beaten. So badly Dr. Mueller had to be called. The scandal tore through the quarter like a lightning strike, but the true shock came when people realized Ma had predicted it all. Now the whispers turned to open suspicion. The pale girl, with the unblinking eyes, had foreseen Dietrich's death, and the Weber-Kellner scandal. Former friends avoided the Richters entirely. Children were kept far from their home. Even shopkeepers dealt with them reluctantly. At the brewery, Henrik's standing crumbled. Kellner made it clear the Richters were no longer welcome at company gatherings. But Emma remained untouched by the tension. She kept watching, kept calculating her gray eyes, tracking lives the way others tracked the seasons. Then she began a leather-bound journal, filling it with numbers, dates, and coded observations her parents dared not read. And every time they saw her bent over those neat, precise columns, an unspoken dread settled deeper in their hearts. As winter finally loosened its grip and spring crept into Milwaukee, the Richter family's isolation deepened. The German quarter, once a haven of familiar faces and friendly greetings, now felt hostile, its streets heavy with unspoken judgment. Henrik began entertaining the unthinkable, leaving Milwaukee, abandoning everything they had built, and starting over somewhere far from the whispers, and far from the terrible accuracy of his daughter's predictions. But Emma wasn't finished. Her mind had already begun processing data that would lead to the darkest secrets yet. By April, the first hints of warmth touched the city after the brutal winter, and Emma's leather-bound journal grew thicker. It was never far from her hands. Page after page filled with complex charts, tracking human behaviors, sequences of numbers her parents couldn't decipher, and maps of the German quarter marked with strange symbols and precise measurements. The community's fear now took tangible form. Children were forbidden to pass by the Richter house. Shopkeepers served the family quickly, avoiding eye contact. Even Father Caller limited his interaction to polite nods at Sunday Mass. But Emma's seclusion only honed her skills without the distractions of friendship or play. Her mind locked more deeply onto the mathematical patterns she saw in every human gesture. One person, however, was curious rather than fearful. Dr. Friedrich Müller, the community's physician, a Berlin-trained doctor who had seen rare mental conditions before. Müller viewed Emma's abilities as a scientific puzzle rather than a supernatural curse. When Henrik approached him in private, desperate for understanding, Müller agreed to examine Emma. It was a rainy Thursday morning in his cramped office above the Water Street Pharmacy. Emma answered the doctor's questions with unnerving precision, her gaze fixed on some invisible equation. "Your father tells me you can predict events," Müller said, in his accented English. "How do you do this?" Emma's voice was flat, her words measured. "I observe patterns and calculate probabilities based on established behavior. People think their actions are random. They are not. They follow sequences. When I have enough data points, I can predict future behavior with high accuracy." Müller leaned forward. "Give me an example." Emma flipped through her journal, stopping at a page dense with figures. "Mrs. Brennan believes she keeps a secret, but her pattern is obvious. For 8 weeks every Tuesday and Friday at precisely 3:15, she walks to the church but, instead of entering, she continues to the rectory and stays for exactly 43 minutes. Father Kerr's pattern has also changed. He buys more candles and wine, and his evening prayers extend by an average of 17 minutes on those same days. The correlation is statistically significant." Muller's stomach tightened. The implications were scandalous. But more disturbing than the content was the cold, methodical way Emma had tracked it. "How long have you been watching people like this?" he asked. "Always," she said simply. "But I began making calculations when I learned mathematics. The patterns became clearer then." Afterward, Müller spoke to Henrik and Greta in hushed tones. "Your daughter's mind works differently. This is a neurological condition, not what the neighbors say. But I cannot explain the extent of it." His science couldn't erase the unease, and 2 days later, Emma's next prediction proved why. "There will be a fire at the Zimmerman house on Sunday evening," she announced over dinner. "It will start at 8:47, spread to 3 neighboring buildings, and Mr. Zimmerman will not survive." Greta's face went pale. "Emma, how can you say such a thing?" Emma consulted her journal, as if reading from a ledger. "Mr. Zimmerman has been drinking lamp oil mixed with whiskey for 12 days. His wife left for Chicago yesterday, which follows a pattern I've seen before major domestic incidents. The chimney has structural damage. I calculated it from the smoke's angle and soot deposits. Probability of fire, 93%. Greta's hands trembled. It wasn't just what Emma said it was, how she said it. Tragedy, to her, was nothing more than a solved equation. Henrik decided he had to intervene. He found Franz Zimmerman at the brewery the next evening, drunk and reeking of lamp oil. When Henrik warned him, Zimmerman laughed and spat crude jokes about the devil child who thinks she knows everything. Yet something in Henrik's voice must have struck a chords. Merman promised to be careful with the lamps. Sunday night arrived unseasonably warm, a dry wind sweeping in from the west. At exactly 8:47, flames burst from the Zimmerman house. Within minutes, fire devoured 3 adjacent homes. Zimmerman's body was later found in his kitchen, overcome while trying to fight the blaze. Emma's precision down to the exact minute sent shockwaves through the quarter. Heinrich's warning to Zimmerman had been overheard by brewery workers, and word spread quickly. The community's unease hardened into fear. 3 families, the Bronces, the Kohlas, and the Steiners, were left homeless. Conversations in the quarter turned to whispers whenever the Richter's name was mentioned. Heinrich's job at the brewery became unbearable. Co-workers avoided him. Conversations stopped when he entered a room. Kellner, still bearing scars from the Weber scandal, made it clear the Richters were unwelcome, and yet Emma carried on, oblivious or indifferent to the storm around her. Her journal thickened with increasingly complex entries, probability matrices, predictions extending weeks ahead, patterns weaving through multiple lives at once. Greta could no longer bring herself to look inside the book. She feared what calculations her daughter might be making about their neighbors, their friends, or even their own family. The child who had once been Greta's greatest joy was now the source of her deepest dread. Emma's emotionless discussions of human tragedy, her dispassionate breakdowns of people's most intimate secrets, had stripped away any illusion that she was like other children. It felt as though something vital in her mind had been rewired, or lost entirely. The breaking point came on a pale Tuesday morning in late April. Emma sat at her usual spot by the kitchen window, gaze locked on the street with surgical focus. Suddenly, she turned to her mother, gray eyes unblinking. "Mama, there is something wrong with the pattern today." Greta's hands froze in the dough she was kneading. "What do you mean, Emma?" Emma flipped through her leather-bound journal with practiced efficiency. Every Tuesday for 11 weeks, Mrs. Brennan leaves her home at exactly 3:15 and walks to the rectory. Today, she left at 2:47 and walked toward the river, step length reduced by 12%. Breathing irregular. Indicator suggests severe distress. This suggests a final decision. The cold certainty in her daughter's voice made Greta's skin crawl. "Emma, don't say such things. Mrs. Brennan is a good woman. She would never." Probability of self-harm, 87%, Emma interrupted, her tone as casual as if discussing the day's weather. Pattern disruption of this magnitude, combined with physical stress markers, typically results in irreversible action within 4 hours. Her deviation began 43 minutes ago. Greta's vision blurred. She fled to the back garden, where Heinrich was working the soil in search of some normalcy. "Heinrich, you must come. Emma says Mrs. Brennan is going to harm herself. We have to stop her." They found Emma still by the window, calmly recording more notes as if chronicling a weather pattern rather than a human life. "Tell me exactly," Heinrich said. She deviated from her Tuesday routine by 28 minutes. Indicators show emotional distress. Peak likelihood of action, between 5 and 7 this evening. Heinrich didn't hesitate. He left at once, following the route Emma described. He found Margaret Brennan at the river docks, staring into the black water. Her face was hollow, her eyes raw from crying. "Mrs. Brennan," he called gently. She turned, startled. "Heinrich, what are you doing here? I was worried. You seemed troubled." Her face crumpled. "I can't bear it, the shame, the whispers, knowing they all know about my weakness. Father Collar says it's sin, but I can't help what I feel for him. Better to end it than to live like this." Heinrich's stomach dropped. Emma had been right. He spent the next 2 hours coaxing her away from the edge, telling her the shame would pass, that death was no answer. By the time he returned home, he was exhausted and shaken. Emma was at the table, journal open, pen in hand. Without looking up, she said, "Mrs. Brennan did not follow through. Intervention altered the probability. I will need to adjust variables for cases involving third-party interference." Heinrich stared at her. She had not only foreseen a suicide attempt that hadn't yet happened, she was treating his desperate intervention as just another data point. That night, while Emma slept peacefully, Henrik and Greta made a decision. They would leave Milwaukee. They could no longer endure the stares, the whispers, or the unsettling reality that their daughter's grasp of human pain was purely mathematical. Plans began quietly. Somewhere far away, maybe Emma could live without being feared, but Emma wasn't finished, and the most disturbing revelation was yet to come. On the morning of May 1st, 1873, sunlight poured through the kitchen window as Emma looked up from her journal. Her voice was steady. "Papa, I need to show you something. My calculations have revealed a pattern that explains everything." Henrik sat down slowly, dread crawling up his spine. Emma turned the journal toward him. Its pages were dense with charts, maps, and strings of numbers, meticulous as the work of a seasoned investigator. "For 26 months, I have tracked the behavior of 43 adults in our community," she began. "At first, I believed the patterns were random, but systematic analysis revealed correlations indicating organized criminal activity." Blood ran cold. "Emma, what are you saying?" Her tone didn't change. 7 men meet in secret every Wednesday at midnight in the basement of Kellner's brewery. Their movements are calculated to avoid detection routes that avoid main streets, synchronized timing, and deviations from their stated activities. For example, Mr. Steinberg tells his wife he works late, but leaves the mill at the exact same time as the others, taking the same concealed route to the brewery. She pointed to a hand-drawn map of the German quarter, covered in precise symbols and measurements. Every variable aligns. And with that, Henrik realized, whatever Emma had uncovered, it was far bigger and far more dangerous than gossip, scandal, or tragedy. "The pattern has held for 26 months, Emma began, her voice steady, with only 3 exceptions each, caused by illness or family emergencies. Henrik stared at the map spread before him, recognizing the names she had marked: Wilhelm Weber, Franz Kellner, Hans Zimmermann, Otto Steinberg, Klaus Brennan, Gustav Wolf, and Hermann Kruger. "Emma, how could you possibly know about secret meetings?" "I observe everything, Papa," she said without hesitation. "Every night, every movement, every deviation from pattern." She flipped to another page, dense with numbers. "But the meetings aren't the most important discovery. My calculations show these 7 men have been involved in systematic theft from brewery operations. Total losses of approximately $47,000 over 26 months. Henrik's hands shook. That sum was more than most families in the quarter would see in a lifetime. "How could you possibly calculate that?" Emma's explanation was chilling in its precision. "I compared reported beer production to actual output based on observed deliveries, ingredient purchases, and waste patterns. The discrepancies indicated theft. To identify the thieves, I tracked spending patterns. Mr. Weber bought new furniture worth $300. Mr. Steinberg sent large packages to relatives in Germany 12 times in 3 months. All 7 displayed spending inconsistent with their incomes. The patterns aligned perfectly." Henrik felt the blood drain from his face. His daughter had, through sheer observation and mathematics, uncovered a criminal conspiracy. "The theft requires someone in management," Emma continued. "The patterns point to Ernst Kellner as the organizer." The blow landed like a physical strike. Ernst Kellner, the brewery owner, who had been isolating the Richters, was, in Emma's estimation, the mastermind. "Emma, these are dangerous accusations. Are you certain?" She glanced down at her journal. "Mathematical probability, 96%. But Papa, there's more. Mr. Kellner knows. I observe everything. 3 weeks ago, he stood outside our house twice 17 minutes each time, calculating whether I had discovered his secret. He suspects I know." A cold, suffocating dread gripped Henrik. Emma's mind had not only exposed the conspiracy, had made her a target. "Probability they act against our family, 84%, Emma concluded, with peak likelihood, in the next 72 hours. Henrik understood instantly. This was no longer about scandal or theft. This was survival. That night, he made his choice. Under the cover of darkness, he carried Emma's journal to Dr. Mueller. Mueller read in silence, his face pale in lamplight. Henrik, if she is correct, this is the largest theft operation in Milwaukee's history. And if Kellner suspects she knows your family is in mortal danger. He agreed to help. By midnight, Mueller had arranged for Henrik to take an emergency brewing job in distant Minnesota cover for a sudden escape. They would leave before Emma's 72-hour window closed, as the Richters loaded their few belongings into Muller's wagon. Emma gave her final calculation. In approximately 6 months, the theft will be discovered by other means. Mr. Kellner will face justice, but 3 of the 7 men will not survive the investigation. The probability is clear. Henrik shuddered. Even as they fled, she was projecting the fates of men who would soon be dead. Her prediction proved exact. By winter, a federal investigation shattered the theft ring. Kellner was arrested and convicted. 3 conspirators died under suspicious circumstances, but in the dark. Silent hours of May 2, 1873. The Richters slipped out of Milwaukee, leaving behind nothing but rumors. Dr. Mueller told the community they had returned to Bavaria. No ship records supported it. In truth, they settled in the small brewery town of New Ulm, Minnesota, where Henrik found steady work and Greta tried to rebuild their life. But Emma remained unchanged, her gray eyes still scanning, her mind still calculating. Mueller kept in contact for months. Emma had begun working with Dr. Herman Weiss, a mathematics professor fascinated by her abilities. He sought to harness her gift for constructive purposes. Then, in November 1873, a letter arrived from Henrik containing Emma's final, chilling prediction about the Milwaukee theft operation. As Emma had predicted with chilling precision, federal investigators eventually dismantled Ernst Kellner's conspiracy. Kellner was arrested and convicted of embezzling over $50,000 from multiple brewery operations. His closest accomplice, Wilhelm Weber, was found dead in his home, officially ruled a suicide, though whispers suggested something far darker. Otto Steinberg died in what authorities labeled a drunken accident, and Hermann Kruger succumbed to a sudden heart attack that bore unsettling similarities to certain poisons Dr. Mueller recognized. Emma's prediction had been flawless. Even from hundreds of miles away and months before events unfolded, her calculations were exact, right down to the 3 conspirators who would not live to face judgment. Milwaukee's German quarter eventually began to recover. The scandal had drawn unwanted federal scrutiny, but it had also cleansed a rot that had quietly eroded the community for years. New families moved into the houses left vacant by death and exile. The cobblestone streets once again filled with laughter, music, and the aroma of fresh bread. But the name Emma Richter became a cautionary whisper. The pale girl with the unblinking gray eyes, who could predict deaths, betrayals, and disasters, through sheer observation, became part of neighborhood folklore. Parents told her story to warn their children about the dangers of knowing too much. Adults quietly wondered what secrets still hid behind the facades of their neighbors' lives. Father Kohler, who had once declared Emma's abilities a gift from God, later confided to Dr. Mueller that her predictions had shaken his faith. He questioned whether some knowledge was simply too dangerous for human minds to bear, and whether Emma had been a blessing or a curse. Spring 1874. Nearly a year after the Richters' disappearance, Dr. Mueller sent his final letter to the family. The German quarter, he reported, had largely returned to normal, though Emma's story still drifted through backroom conversations. But the investigation had revealed something even more disturbing. The journal Henrik had left with Mueller contained far more than evidence of the brewery conspiracy. Emma had been tracking entire community behavior patterns, dozens of families, mapped and profiled in exacting detail. with predictions stretching months into the future. Federal investigators, men trained in criminal profiling, were both awed and unsettled. Mueller wrote, "Your daughter's mind works in ways that professional investigators might envy, and yet, I am grateful she is far from Milwaukee. That kind of knowledge is too dangerous for any community." The last historical trace of Emma appears in the 1875 records of New Ulm College's mathematics department. Professor Herman Weiss noted that his special student displayed unprecedented skills in statistical analysis and behavioral prediction, but the entry also recorded that her family had moved away once more, for personal reasons. After that, nothing. Emma Richter vanished from history as completely as she had slipped out of Milwaukee that dark night in May of 1873. Some historians believe families with such gifted children chose anonymity to shield them from exploitation or from communities that might turn on them. Emma's case remains one of the rare documented examples detailed enough to reveal the terrifying scope of such abilities. Modern science now recognizes that neurological conditions, such as savant syndrome or certain forms of autism, can produce minds that process information in ways that seem supernatural to others. In 1873, those abilities were called divine or demonic, but whatever the cause, Emma's story stands as a reminder. The most terrifying revelations don't always come from the supernatural. Sometimes, they come from the relentless application of pure logic to human lives. In a world where we believe our secrets are safe, Emma Richter's existence whispers otherwise, reminding us that the patterns we think we hide